Hello, I'm Alice and I'm going to read from a zine I wrote last summer called I Don't Know When to Say Goodbye to You. And the blurb on the back says it's a zine where I get emotional about a tower block being demolished, and I think that pretty much sums it up. The tower block I'm talking about in the zine actually might not be demolished. There's currently a consultation in place, which means it might instead be modernised, but certainly for a very long time we've expected that it's going to be demolished, and we're told it's going to be demolished. But yeah, I mean, it's just something it took me a really long time to write, and even though it took me so long to write, it's still full of typos and half sentences. But it's really something I wanted to put down to kind of process how I was feeling about a building that was a big part of my life possibly not existing anymore, and all the kind of grief that goes along with community and physical changes to where we live, which I think happens quite a lot in London and a lot in the UK in general, I think, at the moment. This is a zine about James Riley Point on the Carpenters estate in Stratford, East London. In 2004, Newham Council announced it would be demolished. Today it's still standing, unoccupied. James Riley Point was my first home. I started this zine in 2016, and it's taken me 4 years to finish. In May 2016, I went out and around the Carpenters estate to take a few snaps of stuff I knew I'd want to remember. It's something I was always meaning to do, but as we've never been sure when the demolition would happen, I didn't feel any need to rush it. All the photos in the zine were taken on that walk. I didn't live in the block very long. My parents and sister moved in just before I was born. While I was still a toddler, we moved to a different flat just across the road from the tower block. Even when I wasn't living in the block, it was a very big part of my life. My dad worked for the council, and he'd often do shifts there. I'd hang out in the lodge with my dad when there was no one to babysit me. I played with the kids in the block, run under its foundational stilts, fascinated at how something so tall could be kept up by something so slim. I go to the block's community barbecues, eating burgers and jerk chicken, jumping on the bouncy castle. My parents and sister moved to London from Ireland in early 1988. Ireland was in recession, and the factory my father worked at had closed down. Some of my uncles were working here on building sites, so it made sense to come over and try and find work. They spent most of that year homeless. Things became more urgent when my mother discovered that she was pregnant with me. My dad interviewed for a job at Newham Council, and in those days it was common for a council flat to be offered to all employees, the rent for which was subsidised from their wages. With my dad taking this job, we had our first stable home. That home gave my family security. When I was born, my parents did not have the social support system they had back in Ireland. They had to build up from scratch, especially as all my uncles eventually moved back home. Staying in one home meant that they could get to know their neighbours. I was regularly looked after by the woman next door, while my mum did cleaning shifts at the pub on the estate. She was an old woman living on her own, and in time she became part of our family. The block was a mix of people, many like our family who had arrived in London relatively recently, some who had lived on the Carpenters estate for generations. Often small groups would congregate in the concierge's lodge. Neighbours would get to chat to each other, and almost everyone knew all the council workers by name. When we moved across the road, it was different. There was only 6 flats in our block with no communal meeting point. For a time, we had an outdoor area for everyone to hang their laundry, and it was a good point to chat, but eventually this stopped being maintained and was removed. As my dad was a caretaker for the road, people would come to our door and ask for help. Sometimes little 6-year-old me would be asked to help with a leak in someone's flat by a neighbour when my dad was out. What was I supposed to do? The council wasn't paying me. The 2004 announcement that the building would be demolished wasn't really a shock. It happened in amongst the Olympic bid, but that wasn't the only thing that was going on with an eye to redevelop Stratford. At that point, we'd heard for years that the Eurostar was coming soon, and as part of that, lots of new pieces of public art popped up in the area. Whether it was a fast track to Paris or the Olympic Games, one way or another the area was going to change. Somebody, someplace had eyed it as a profitable spot for redevelopment. It's the same story in countless working class neighbourhoods across the country. Over the past 10 years, it's been hard to keep up with what's supposed to be going on with the block's demolition and wider regeneration of the Carpenters estate. From 2004 to 2010, I used to regularly sob myself to sleep that one day I would look up and it wouldn't be there. After all this time, it's hard to feel like it will ever happen. I've ended up in a lot of conversations with people who think this sort of redevelopment is positive. Blocks like James Rowley are unsightly or unsafe, and we need to modernise tends to be the gist of their argument. People who say these things tend to have secure housing. I felt daft for a long time about how emotional the idea of the demolition made me. After all, my parents' flat was still safe. However, I didn't really know that. So much change was happening and information came in such small drips. Nothing felt certain. While the rapid redevelopment occurred in Stratford, we kept being told how good it would be. It's hard to feel how great things will be when noise pollution from several building sites leak into your road all day and then helicopters circle all night.